if you can help us go a little deep into Performance Max campaign, how marketers should leverage it in the best optimal way.
The success that you're going to see is as good as the effort. There's been a lot of criticism for PMax, which was justified, but there has also been a lot of criticism because people have tried it and failed.
Where do you see the marketing landscape is heading?
There's going to be a point of convergence between branding and performance.
What are your takes on predictive analytics tools?
Analytics used to be observation of the data, but nowadays analytics now is all about modeling.
What sort of simple AI tools to streamline day-to-day operations and improve overall campaign performances?
My initial writing was about using Google Sheets and XPath to actually scrape website and extrapolate text and data.
Welcome, Andrea. Welcome to the series. We really appreciate your time. Let me quickly have an introduction. Andrea, I know you from last 15, 17 years. You have been in the industry more than 24, 25 years.
Let's not talk about that. That makes me really old.
No, but amazing.
Yeah, it's been a long time.
Yeah. No, amazing the way you have been crafting your path, have great level of extensive experience and exposure, serving a lot of brands in London, in Australia now, and you still serve a lot of global brands. I was fortunate enough to work with you in person as part of your team as well for a few years. So very, very much impressed with your deep knowledge and most importantly, your passion. Right, it gets highlighted very well when we see your contribution on search engine and many other platforms. Right, the way you contribute, that your passion gets it's loud and clear. So yeah, welcome to the series.
Thank you,
and look forward to our interaction today.
Yeah, thanks. Look, I'm really excited to be speaking with you today. As you say, we've known each other for a long time, and it's fair to say that we kind of grew together because we had similar paths. So it's nice to reconnect whenever we got the chance and the opportunity. We live in places that are quite far apart, but it's always nice to be able to catch up with you, and I'm looking forward to our chat today.
Yeah, great. Okay, so without further delay, let's deep dive. We're just going to have series of questions on various topics and would love to have your inputs based on your exposure and extensive experience you hold. So let me deep dive. To start with, let's start with kind of audience targeting and hyper-personalized approach, which everyone talks about, right?
Mm-hmm.
So would love to know, Andrea, with push of hyper-personalized marketing, many marketers are doing and deep diving into data, but still not hitting the mark of how and what specific audience targeting practices they should follow. Would you mind sharing few suggestions or best practices on how you navigate that?
It's a very interesting question, and I think there is lots of nuances in that, and I think there is lots of answers too. Look, it's not secret that audience targeting has become more and more important. We've seen how things have evolved in the last few years, and if we take the example of paid search and Google Ads, originally, it was all based on keyword targeting. The keyword was telling you what the user is trying to do. So you have an intent when you're looking at a keyword. But the reality is that in the last few years, we've seen an evolvement or an evolution of this, where the keyword is one of the signals, and the audience targeting has become more and more important. It's also true to think about the fact that these changes have been pushed by, obviously, Facebook and Meta, on which interest targeting, audience targeting are really the key criteria for which you can reach and engage with people. But the other thing that is also true nowadays is that audiences, in a way, seem to be becoming also less defining. And it's an interesting development because I picked that up from my latest trip in Europe from some of the industry conferences I was attending to, where some people are doing some experiments and looking at how the platforms are evolving in terms of audience targeting. There is a very popular guy that works on the Meta platform, which is and he's called John Loomer, and he did some tests and he was talking about how in his experiments the audience signals are becoming less important. So what that means is that basically when he was trying to validate whether audience signals and audience targeting were still effective, the results were actually kind of negating that. And that's something that I also picked up from other conversation with other experts, whereas, for example, is a very similar thing in the way the Google platform is also working nowadays. Because if you think about PMax, for example, you can input audience targeting, you can input theme keywords or theme of keywords, but it is just more of a suggestion. It's not a targeting. So let me just explain this. So perhaps we're moving away from audience targeting to audience suggestions. So the platform then is going to use that to refine the people that it's going to reach, but it's still going to keep that freedom and liberty to actually expand and say, okay, that's a signal. That's what I'm going to use to inform my decisions, but that's just a signal. And I'm going to try to use it as a signal. So that's something that I picked up that I thought is quite an interesting development. Now, that's one part of the story. The other part of the story is that obviously audience targeting is still important in the sense of that, it's still important that you obviously segment and choose the segment of audience that you wanna reach. You need to do some, you need to specify which audience you wanna target and segment it, because obviously of being able to be relevant, being able to reach the targeting that you're aiming for. But as I say, perhaps the real evolution is the fact that as opposed to targeting, we should be using that as a signal. We should see the audience targeting as a signal.
Interesting. And that leads me to the second question, which is about first-party cookies and privacy regulation, right? As I'm sure, especially coming from your Europe trip recently and attending conferences there, and now rest of the world is taking that up as well, that everyone is getting super conscious on that first-party and cookie data and stuff like that, right? What's your observation that with privacy regulation being tightening up and all the cookies are phasing out, how a marketer should successfully transition that first party data towards ensuring they are leveraging that for personalized marketing effort? Because now you don't get to see all the data points, right? So even that creates limitation with your audience targeting, because a lot of things due to regulation is being restricted. So any tips and suggestions on how a marketer should still capitalize on personalized campaigns?
Yeah, and I think that's a very good question and a good segue from what we were talking about in regards to the audience targeting. I think, as you pointed out, all the privacy concerns, all the privacy regulations that we see, especially in Europe and in the US, have brought attention to the fact that obviously we need a consent first, and all that is creating issues in terms of obviously tracking and being able to obviously have reliable data. Now, what that means is that, as you pointed out, the third-party cookies have become less and less reliable. Since the launch of iOS 14, we've seen how that has impacted us as marketers and advertisers. But the reality is actually that what is promoting is something that in a way is actually a positive change, because as opposed to being able to target people based on third-party cookies and therefore what people used to do before, which was more of a spray and pray approach, so kind of like mass reach, what we see now is that there is the re-evaluation of first-party data, and with that re-evaluation there is also the need to nurture engagement with your own customers. So basically create your customer lists as opposed to obviously buy audiences from someone else. So nurturing those lists means also creating value, because the reality is that nowadays users are very aware of privacy. They really value their time they really value their their efforts as a customer, and their time, as I say, is really important to them. So therefore, if you really want to engage with an audience, you really need to add value. So in a way, we're going back to the marketing basics, where it's about creating value that is seen as valuable and therefore enriching the user experience. And in that regards, what that promotes is basically engagement and a meaningful conversation with your audience. So really, the suggestion for me is to move towards that engagement with your own customers, create your own lists, curate your own CRM, have all those touch points that are making something that is valuable, not just for you, but also for your customer. And I think that's really is the future of targeting, because it's more about, as I say, adding and delivering value.
Very interesting, very interesting. And the overall entire marketing landscape has evolved over last decade, right? Now it's not about that uni-channel. Everything is getting omni-channel. And as you mentioned, it's not just about how you get customers in, it's about how you even nurture them within your CRM, what your touch points are and stuff like that.
Exactly.
With all these transitions, and markets are tough overall, holistically, with global economic situations, right? And everyone is needing more for less. And the reliance of various channels has increased as well. Like now it's not just about performance and acquisition channels. Equally important is your nurture and your CRM and your marketing automation channels as well.
Yeah.
How crucial the performance marketer roles is now, right? And what are the top 3 suggestions you have for any performance marketer today to get the best performance for their Google ads or programmatic or any sort of paid media they are managing?
Yeah. Look, I think the thing is, like you say, is really not necessarily, that we can be omni-channel, but it's certainly a multi-channel advertisement that nowadays become more and more important, because users obviously don't follow a linear path. There is interactions across multiple platforms, multiple touch points, as you correctly said also, and because of the fact that users are more conscious and aware, the user journey is becoming longer. There has been some recent studies that have been published that show how this was the one that I'm thinking of. It was more relevant maybe for the European market, but is a global trend. The fact that users are taking longer to make decisions, especially if you're thinking about consider decisions, purchase decisions. So what that means is that you have to engage with your audience across multiple touch points and multiple platforms. And therefore, what that entails as well is that it's very important that you curate your message. The message is consistent. The message is consistent not only across one channel, but across multiple channels. And therefore, we see that it's becoming more and more important that you also curate your creative and the messaging, because it's about creating something that, again, as I said before, adds value and engages with your audience. So, for example, we've seen advertisers using more things like storytelling or messages that are delivered in a sequence, for example. So all that is becoming really, really important. Another thing they also picked up from my latest trip was when I went to a speech from Rand Fishkin, and he talks a lot about zero-click marketing. And it's quite fascinating because he's putting the emphasis on the fact that we as marketers, and especially performance marketers, focus a lot on clicks, but we often forget the power of branding and create a brand. And the reality is that if you think about measuring clicks with all the challenges we face, such as, for example, privacy, regulations, cookies, and all that kind of stuff, it's very difficult, but we still focus on the clicks and we forget where we can still make an impact and where people are actually spending most of the time. The example he was providing was, if we think about clicks, we think about Google mostly. But if we look at where people are spending time, then social is where people spend most of the time. So it's about thinking not necessarily how clicks are delivering for your campaigns, but think about also how do you create an impact to actually create a brand. And therefore, it's really important to start thinking in a way that is more holistic. Like you say, for example, we need to think about multi-channel. And therefore, you need to think about how that is going to play across multiple platforms, multiple channels, and so on and so forth.
Interesting. Zero-click marketing, yeah?
Yeah, it's very interesting. And I think it makes really good points because at the end of the day, it's also a trend. If you think about it, what he was saying is that, look at the way the search engines are evolving. There is less and less traffic that gets sent out to websites because of the fact that you got structured snippets, for example. You got now AI overviews. You have people also ask, and all that kind of stuff that is basically trying to provide an answer already within the platform. Same thing happens with other platforms like Facebook and TikTok. All those platforms are also trying to retain the user on their own assets and not send them to their website. So therefore, if you rely on clicks, you're missing all that part. So therefore, it's saying don't focus just on the clicks, focus also on what's happening within those platforms and how those interactions that don't drive clicks are still meaningful for you to create a brand. Because essentially what will happen is that people will obviously, recognize you as an authority, as a brand, and then come back to Google and search for you.
Interesting. And providing ROI or showing return on ad spend has always been a challenge, right? And with these behavioral changes coming through, what are your suggestions and tips how a marketer should improve conversion or show better return to the business? Because now everything is distributed, and though your focus as a marketer is always towards that last mile conversion, either it's a revenue or it's a lead, but how a marketer should show that value of their activities, of either it's been driven visibility on social media or even if it's been driven traffic, how do they connect these dots to the revenue?
Yeah, interesting question, and I got two answers for that. So the first thing you can think of is, following on from what we just discussed, is that actually when I was away for my trip to Europe, I actually was speaking at one of the conferences, and my speech was about how to scale meta campaigns in 2025. And one of the key things that I highlighted in my speech was that we need to go past ROI, because the problem with ROI is that, yes, it's a valuable metric, but without the context, it doesn't really give you a lot of information. I can give you an example. You could have an ROI of 10 to 1, but if your costs are 9 out of that 10, you might still not make enough money to actually even break even. So the reality is that what you need to look at the actual investment and the return from that investment across all the marketing channels. And therefore, that's the reason why we talk about MER, so marketing efficiency ratio. So in that case, what you're measuring is the revenue proportionate to what you invest in as a marketing activity, but overall. So in that case, you can really measure if the impact is positive or not. So that is the first thing that I would say in regards to ROI. The ROI, yes, is an important metric, but to look at just ROI, it can be also a little bit misleading. Now, going back to your question in terms of obviously, looking at how can we improve the performance of our campaigns, how can we improve that MER, for example, I think the reality today is that we obviously lean a lot on automation and algorithms. If you think about platforms like Google Ads, Meta, they all obviously use a lot of smart bidding algorithms and automation. But the reality is that machine learning is as good as the information that you provide to the machine. So for that, it's really important that you provide you provide data, and B, you provide the right data. So there is a saying, this is success breeds success. And what that means is that if you want to really make your campaigns perform, you need to provide valuable data. So what that means is that if you want to get conversions that are valuable, you need to actually input conversion data. So for example, offline conversions, enhanced conversions, and all of that. Obviously, on top of that, providing other signals, like we said at the beginning, like for example, audience signals, and all of that can also really help to inform the decision that the machine is going to make. Without that, the best you can aim for is possibly average. Because at the end of the day, if you think about the way, for example, Google Ads works nowadays, is that is a platform that is really level the field. And that's because it's very much all working on automation nowadays. Smart bidding, whether it's TCPA, whether it's TROAS, you name it. But ultimately, everyone can basically do the same if they do the basics. But if you go past that and you start inputting data and helping the machine to make better decisions, that's really what is going to give you an advantage. The other thing is obviously, like I say, using those features of the platforms that perhaps certain users are less used to. Like, for example, there are nowadays more and more features that get a little bit hidden in the settings. Like if you think Meta is always keeps hiding things and makes it very difficult for advertisers. And most of the times nowadays, you have to opt out to remove those default settings. And the other thing is also using other tools, such as, for example, scripts, API, anything that allows you to use features that are not necessarily available on the platform itself.
Interesting. And while we are on that topic, if you can help us go a little deep into Performance Max campaign, what have been your observations and how marketers should leverage it in the best optimal way?
Yeah, I'm just smiling because I think everyone talks about PMax nowadays. That is the topic. You know, PMax, PMax, PMax. Everywhere you go, there is always going to be talks about AI and PMax. Look, the thing is, PMax is obviously, I guess, you know, the first thing I would say is there to stay. You know, is lots of criticism since its inception in 2021, but it's also true that it's evolved a lot, and I think really is where the platforms see the future of advertising in a way that is trying to help advertisers to get across lots of different types of platforms and networks, or even you know, just creating assets. So basically, it's just lowering all those barriers that before were a very big challenge for advertisers. If you think about it, even just thinking back 5 years ago, it was really difficult for small advertisers, small businesses to do display campaigns, to do video campaigns. And the reason why is because they didn't have the assets. But nowadays, generative AI and the integration of generative AI within these platforms is really helping lowering those barriers, and is really helping pretty much all advertisers to be able to embrace and be able to advertise in, you know, Google, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, you name it. You know, talking about PMax specifically, as I say, is improved a lot in the last couple of years, and I think credit to Google. They've been listening to the feedback because they got a lot of feedback. And, you know, if you think about the changes they introduced, you know, now it was only a few days ago they introduced the segmentation. So you are able to segment the performance of your asset groups. That was just a few days ago. Not long ago, they introduced campaign level negative lists. So they keep improving and they keep listening to the feedback, which is very positive, but really is showing you that the trend is there and is there to stay, which is obviously, you know, generative AI is becoming more and more of a part of our campaigns, setup, implementation, and optimization. And yeah, you know, that's there to stay, as I said at the beginning.
Okay. Interesting. No, thanks for sharing that. And yeah, that leads me.
The other thing that I would add to that as well is, just to reconnect with what we said before. Again, though, remember the success that you're going to see is as good as the effort and the input they put. Because
Yes.
it's fair to say as well that, there's been a lot of criticism for PMAX, which was justified because of the fact that initially it was very much of a black box. But there has also been a lot of criticism because people have tried it and failed, thinking, oh, I just put a few headlines, a couple of images, a couple of keywords, and I'm expecting success. The reality is, as I say, with generative AI, with the automation, with machine learning, the efforts are going to be is so important to get meaningful outcomes. That saying, garbage in, garbage out. If you don't put that effort, you can't really expect great results. That is really important to note. So
yeah, that leads me to more towards questions on AI reporting and data. In your experience, right, with a lot of focus towards data-driven marketing and campaign optimization, what are your takes on predictive analytics tools? Like, how reliable have you found them? Or if you have any specific suggestions or recommendation for the audience on which tools would you recommend, and if you have seen any pitfalls or if you have seen some strengths with any predictive analytics tools.
It's a good question, and I think this reconnects to what we were saying before about obviously the challenges that we face in regards to tracking. Analytics used to be observation of the data. If you think about the old GA, it was pretty much what you see is what you're getting. You never question the numbers. But nowadays, the numbers that you see are modeling. Analytics now is all about modeling, and obviously the next big step is the fact that obviously is being used to do predictive modeling as well. So I think in that regards is very exciting, because as opposed to just use it to interpret the data and use that data for insights that might be more or less actionable, the predictive part is quite exciting, because it should, once obviously things are in place, and this is the if things are in place in the right way, it should help you to actually proactively think about the changes or the way you want to optimize the campaign, because you should be able to see what you can expect if you make some changes or if you change some variables. So the predictive part is the really exciting part. Now, obviously, there is still a lot of work that I think needs to be done in terms of being able to really leverage on these tools, at least in terms of mass adoption. I think at the moment there is lots of challenges. One of which is obviously skills and knowledge. I mean, if you think about, for example, GA4 is a very, very powerful platform, and I think again it's getting a lot of backlash because people found it very challenging, because they've been used to using the likes of universal analytics, which, as we said, was a very different tool because it was more based on observation of the data. GA4 is very, very powerful, but it also means that you really need skilled people, at least at this stage, to be able to make the most of it, because it is a very complex and powerful tool. The setup alone can be quite challenging. The whole concept is being flipped. Before we used to track and focus on actions. So if you think about the way universal analytics used to work, it was focused on things like sessions, for example. Nowadays, you still got sessions, but the focus is more on the user and the interaction of the user. And that's the reason why, for example, we track events in GA4. So I think, in a nutshell, really is about how this is going to evolve and how much we're going to progress in adopting this to leverage the tool at its best. Because I think at the moment, the challenge is that we look at GA4 and people look at the numbers and feel like, you just get a bit of insights, but you're not really using the tool and it's not really giving you what it should. So what I think will also happen is probably opening up for more skilled people that will be more specialized. I don't know if you remember, but back in the days we used to have lots of people that specialize in things like Omnichart, Adobe Analytics, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And it's because it was difficult, it was complex. So you needed specialists. And I think analytics has become more and more of a specialist skill. I certainly can't say that I can use GA4 the way I used to use analytics, for example. And that's an opportunity, because I think, again, for those people that will be able to leverage analytics and how powerful it is, it will make a big advantage. The other thing that obviously will involve as well is other opportunities, like the amount of data that we go. Think about, again, analytic GA4, and the fact that we're tracking every single interaction, every single event. It means obviously being able to leverage on that data using other tools like BigQuery and visualization like Power BI, Tableau, and all that. Those things are becoming more important because of the fact that we have much more data. That's the other challenge that we got. And that's the reason why it's important that we know that things are much more complex, but there is a lot more opportunities as well.
Interesting. And while we are on analytics and you sharing all those details, would love to know your suggestions for marketers on how they should optimize their reporting framework with consent mode, remodeling, and things like that coming in play. Any suggestions on how to optimize and enhance their reporting framework?
Yeah, I think reporting, again, is about purpose. So I think it's about defining what your objective is and what you're trying to get from the reports. I think sometimes we see reports just for the sake of just putting numbers on a spreadsheet, but I think it's about really going back to what do you do the report for? What do you try to achieve? What you're trying to communicate? So for me, is about understanding what you're trying to get from the data, and therefore build reports that are actually meaningful, because of the fact that, as I said before, we are overwhelmed with data. We have plenty of data, but the reality is, what do you want to get from that? Like, for example, if it's reporting in terms of providing a dashboard where you got the performance for last week, or for example, week on week, or last month, then obviously, it's as simple as just creating a template, a framework that provides that information. But really, there is not much value if you're just providing data and numbers. Really is about, how do we start using things like generative AI and analysis of the data through, automation and, the likes of ChatGPT or Gemini, for example, to actually surface the insights and the recommendations. That is really where we need to put emphasis and focus. And the other thing is, obviously, as you said, because we're creating predictive modeling, and because of the fact that we know that the data can be a little bit sketchy and we have gaps in the data, is also not necessarily always focusing and fixating with the numbers, but use the data as a way to understand trends and anticipate what could be the possible scenarios that you are facing ahead. I think that's really important, because if you're looking at the absolute numbers, you're kind of missing the point. You're focusing on the small detail and you're forgetting the bigger picture. If, for example, we look at, we had 1,000 clicks last week. Well, it doesn't matter if it's 1,000 or if it's 950. What you really want to focus is, how did that number change compared to the previous week, and what that means. So it's really about focusing on what the numbers and the data is telling us. And that's the reason also why I think visualization is becoming more and more important, because visualization unlocks insights that are very difficult to extrapolate and surface when we're looking at tables of data. So again, that for me is really where things will evolve more and more. And I think, the visualization will be a key part of the reporting and dashboards.
Okay, great. Andrea, you touch AI and ChatGPT, and that's the buzzword everywhere we go around these days, right? I also noticed you recently published an article on Search Engine Journal about web scraping and using AI and ChatGPT for Google Sheets and many other areas. Any suggestions? What sort of simple AI tools, techniques, or quick hacks you recommend for marketers, which they can use to streamline their day-to-day operations and improve their overall campaign performances?
Yeah, that's a good question. And thanks for referring to that article. That was a very popular article that I wrote 2 years ago. I got that published 2 years ago on Search Engine Journal. And is very popular because I got about 200,000 reads for that article and more than
Wow.
100 shares. So very popular, to the point that last year they asked me to revisit it and refresh it. So initially, my initial writing was about using Google Sheets and XPath to actually scrape a website and extrapolate text and data, essentially. But when I refreshed the article last year, it was more about how can we use AI, and specifically in my case was ChatGPT, to actually improve that process. And the thing is that, nowadays you need even less knowledge, because what you can do is you can leverage, the likes of ChatGPT to actually give you the prompts to be able to do those tasks. What I faced when I did my experiments was that the technology sometimes still fails you, still can face some issues, but it's still a very important, I guess, aspect in the way we can improve things nowadays. What I mean with that is that when I think about AI and where we are at today, is that AI is a great enabler to improve your performance and efficiency, if you like. So, but I think about AI as a tool, part of a wider array of tools at the moment.
Mhm.
And it's more about improving your processes and workflows. At least this is where I see AI at the moment. So what I mean is that, yes, you can automate some tasks from end to end, so from beginning to the end. But the reality is that you're more likely at this point to use it as part of your processes. If you think about it, there's so many examples we can think of that we already using, most of us we use nowadays, but we don't even think about that much. Oh, I'm using AI. But you use it to ask questions. Only last week OpenAI released the search functionality of ChatGPT in Australia. We use AI for keyword research to validate data. So you use it within your processes, and that is really creating efficiencies. So that is really where I think we are at today. But this is what is today. I think the future looks much brighter and much more interesting, because again, something that I got from my trip and from the conferences I attended is that there is a general consensus that really what is going to be exciting is the next phase of generative AI, where it seems like quite a few people agree on the fact that, for example, in a couple of years' time, we wouldn't even have landing pages. We won't be talking about landing pages anymore. But there will be AI agents, which will be basically the way you interact with a brand or with a website. So what that means is that we will have unique and very much customized experiences that are relevant to you and that are unique to you, and not necessarily what someone else is going to experience. So that for me is where it gets very exciting and very interesting. But yeah, I guess we are probably a few years away from that. But obviously, lots of developments, things happen very, very fast. So it's definitely, a space to watch. And obviously, if you're not using AI at the moment, I think then obviously, that is probably a bit of a problem.
Okay. And you also contributed to PPC Trend 2024 ebook for Search Engine Journal.
2025.
So now it's the time.
Yeah.
Well, what do you see? What are the emerging trends which marketers should focus for 2025?
Yeah, look, I think it's a good question. Yeah, I would encourage anyone in the audience to go and check that ebook, because I contributed to that, but there is also take from other authors that are really big names in the PPC I guess industry. So I would encourage people to go and check it out, download it, and read it and enjoy it. My take in terms of some of the biggest trends will be, as we said at the beginning, I think it's really about the fact that we need to think about and put at the front the users. really is
Right.
about, not necessarily thinking about just, like I say, third parties, first party, but it's really thinking about how do we engage with the users in a meaningful way that is going to benefit both them and us as a brand in order to achieve our own objectives. Because of that, I think, I don't know how many people are talking about this, but I do really think that one of the biggest things we'll see is really more and more emphasis on the creative. I'm thinking about that from a Google Ads perspective. And if you think about, the fact that we used to create ads, run the ads, and not really think too much of it. And still to this day, I still see that kind of approach and attitude a lot, because when you look at Google Ads creatives, I see a lot of ads that are basically just repeating the same concept, just repeating the same USPs. And that's a bad use of responsive ads, for example. But I think that we will see more and more of an emphasis on the creative itself. And that's not just for the text ads, but also for display and video. And if you think about it, I think it will be a transferable concept that we see moving from social media to Google Ads or PPC, for example, because of the fact that the creative is becoming more and more important. As we said before, users are spending more time doing research, users are spending more time before they make a decision and purchase. So therefore, the creative and the way we get to communicate with people will be more and more important. Therefore, the quality of the creative is going to be more and more important. And I think that's also what we can see happening also in the platforms themselves, because, for example, Google is started looking at or introducing brand guidelines. For example, with responsive ads, one of the challenges we had before is always been the fact that the ads looked pretty ugly. You got Google just choosing a background color, you got fonts that you can choose, and then sticking an image to it, and you can say they're pretty ugly. But the reality is that in a nowadays market, the expectation is that the ads should reflect something a bit more of a much better quality. So that's what we're going to see. And I think it's going to be exciting, because that, I think, will put an emphasis on responsive ads, so ads that are created automatically or programmatically, but also in terms of rediscovering the importance of creating good creative, good design, good assets, and not only for the display and video, but also for the text. Whereas, it's not good enough anymore to say, best hotels in Sydney, best hotels, and repeat that 20 times on your ads.
Yeah. No, true. No, thanks for sharing that, Andrea. And I think great insight throughout the session. I would love to end with one last question. It's a little holistic and not specific to performance marketing, right? You have been working with some leading global brands like Nike, PlayStations in your journey, and you currently also work with a lot of global brands. Where do you see the marketing landscape is heading, and where these brands are focusing for, let's say, look at next 2 years of horizon? If you are to kind of draw a picture that how the marketing landscape would be 2 years down the line, what are your thoughts?
Look, I think it's an interesting question, and I think is a tough answer. But I think, in terms of global market, I think, obviously, as I say, there's going to be a point of convergence between branding and performance. I think, we often looked at the two things as separate things. We often have different teams that are looking after branding, people that are looking after performance. The reality is, again, is an artificial split that we make. But the reality is that we see more and more convergence between the two. And I think, brand nowadays as a performance elements or as performance elements attached to it. And likewise, we cannot do performance without branding. So I think it's really about the convergence of the two. And that is a positive thing, because again, it's about putting the emphasis on the user, as opposed to think about, okay, I do this campaign to generate awareness, but this campaign is just run in silo. And is driving maybe top of mind, but it's not really connected with the rest of the activity that we're doing. The other thing is that, with that being said as well, the other pressure that we see is the fact that obviously, we are in a tough market from an economic standpoint. Things are not easy, because we know there is a lot of people that are under pressure from an economic standpoint. But that's also true in terms of marketing as well, in the sense that I think we will see more and more emphasis put on creating sustainable campaigns. I don't think we can afford anymore to create campaigns and spend big chunks of money just to create brand awareness. Everything needs to be created and have a strong purpose attached to it, but also needs to be done in a sustainable way. Like, for example, if we create assets, we need to make sure that those assets are created in a sustainable way, so that it's not just done for a one-off, but they can be repurposed, reused. So I think that sustainability as well will be an important factor as well. That we will see. The other thing that I think is important is that, although I talk about convergence, I think there is also an element of we're going back in circle, in the sense that we see more and more the re-emergence or re-evaluation of specialism. I think, if you think about it, our job, because of multiple reasons, is becoming more and more challenging, because, yes, we have machine learnings and systems that are helping us to do our job, but at the same time, to really be able to drive the best performance, we need to be the specialists that know all the tips and tricks and know which levers and all the hidden features that we can leverage. And it's about, knowing how to use your data, knowing how to find your insights, knowing how to leverage that, and predicting future behaviors and trends. And for that, I think also some specialism is quite important. So we see a little bit of a re-emergence of specialism and specialist agencies as well.
Interesting. Great, Andrea. Thanks for having an amazing, insightful session, and a lot of intel. I'm sure a lot of people who go through these video or go through this information would be able to learn a lot, and I'm sure it will help them in their journey ahead.
That's good. Thanks. Thanks for the feedback. It's very flattering.
Yeah, great.